Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. James Reed stood in the parking lot of the construction site in Bakersfield, watching the sun dip below the oil derricks that dotted the horizon. His hands were calloused from 12-hour days of honest work, rebuilding what others had torn down. It was simple work, physical work, the kind that let a man's mind rest after 15 years of calculating wind speed, elevation, and the precise moment to squeeze a trigger halfway across the world. His phone buzzed against his hip. The screen showed Mom. He smiled, wiping concrete dust from his fingers before answering. Hey, Ma. Little late for you, isn't it? The sound that came through made his blood turn to ice. Not words at first, just broken sobs and gasping breaths that spoke of pain, both physical and something deeper. When Sharon Reed finally managed to speak, her voice was barely recognizable. Jamie, oh God, Jamie. James was already moving toward his truck, keys in hand. Mom, where are you? Are you hurt? Home. I'm home. They came. 5 of them. Broke the door. I tried to. Another sob cut through. They took everything. The TV, your father's medals, my jewelry. But that wasn't enough for them. They laughed, Jamie. They hit me and they laughed. His knuckles went white around the phone. I'm on my way. Did you call 911? They're here now. The police. But Jamie, I need you. Please. 20 minutes, Mom. I'm coming. He made it in 15, pushing his battered Ford through every yellow light and rolling stop. The neighborhood where he'd grown up looked different under the harsh glare of police lights. Smaller, more vulnerable than he remembered. 2 patrol cars sat in the driveway of the modest ranch house his father had bought 30 years ago. Sharon Reed sat on the porch steps, a blanket around her shoulders despite the warm California evening. At 73, she'd always been small but mighty, the kind of woman who'd raised James and his sister alone after their father died in the first Gulf War. Now she looked diminished, her left eye swollen shut, her lips split, bruises already darkening on her arms. James felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had before every mission in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in places that didn't officially exist on any map. A calm, calculated fury that made his hands steady and his mind sharp. Ma! He knelt beside her, gently touching her shoulder. She grabbed his hand and held it tight. They were animals, Jamie. Just animals. A young patrol officer approached, notebook in hand. His nameplate read Hutchins. He looked uncomfortable, like this was a scene he'd witnessed too many times before. You're the son? I'm Officer Lonnie Hutchins. We've taken your mother's statement. Unfortunately, with home invasions like this, unless we have clear evidence or witnesses, what about fingerprints? DNA? There were 5 of them in this house. Hutchins shifted his weight. We'll file a report, but I have to be honest with you. These kinds of cases, without clear leads, it's difficult to... So you're saying you won't do anything? I'm saying we'll do what we can with the resources we have. James studied the officer's face. He recognized the look, not malice, just resignation. The system was broken, overwhelmed, and Sharon Reed was just another number in an endless file of victims. After the police left, James walked through his mother's house. The back door hung crooked on its hinges where they'd kicked it in. The living room was trashed, drawers pulled out, cushions slashed. His father's Purple Heart and Bronze Star were gone from the mantel. Sharon's modest jewelry box, empty. Even the old television had been ripped from the wall. But it was the blood on the carpet near the kitchen that made James's jaw clench. Not a lot, but enough to show where they'd beaten her when she tried to fight back. His mother, who baked cookies for the neighborhood kids and volunteered at the community center, had been terrorized in her own home for sport. They didn't just rob you, James said quietly, finding Sharon in the kitchen trying to make tea with shaking hands. They beat you after. For fun. She nodded, tears streaming down her damaged face. The one with the tattoos on his neck, he said I was too poor to bother with, that they should have just burned the place down. Then he hit me again. James took the kettle from her hands and pulled her into a careful hug. Go stay with Aunt Teresa tonight. I'll clean this up. Jamie, I don't want to leave. This is my home. I know, Ma, and you'll be back soon. I promise. After she left with his Aunt Teresa Wagner, James sat alone in the dark living room. He could call his old unit. Jared Haynes was still in California, working private security. A few phone calls, and he'd have help. But this wasn't a military operation requiring a team. This was personal. James spent the night cleaning his mother's house and thinking. Not the scattered, emotional thinking that led to mistakes, but the methodical approach that had kept him alive through 97 confirmed kills and countless close calls. Every successful mission started with intelligence, and intelligence started with observation. At dawn, he examined the broken back door more carefully. Cheap lock, easily kicked in, but the angle of the damage told him something. The first kick had missed. There was a dent in the frame 3 inches above the lock. Whoever did this was strong but sloppy, probably high on adrenaline or something else. He photographed the boot print in the dirt outside. Size 13, work boots, heavy tread pattern. The kind worn by construction workers or manual laborers. Not much, but it was something. Inside, James found more. A cigarette, but near the back fence. Marlboro Red, crushed under a boot. The fence had fresh scrapes where someone had climbed over. A piece of denim thread caught on a nail. Small things that the police had missed or didn't have time to process. His phone rang. Jared Haynes. Heard about your mom, brother. You need anything? James and Jared had served together in the 75th Ranger Regiment, part of the same sniper team for 8 years. They'd saved each other's lives more times than either cared to count. After discharge, Jared had stayed in the area while James had drifted, looking for purpose in civilian life. Information, James said. 5 men hit my mother's house yesterday. Beat her up after they robbed her. Police aren't going to do shit. Jared was quiet for a moment. So you're hunting? 48 hours. That's my window before trails go cold. What do you need? Access to street cameras, police scanners, anyone who might have seen something. This neighborhood, someone always sees. Give me 2 hours. James spent those hours canvassing the neighborhood himself. Most people weren't home during the day, but he found Bertha Harding 3 houses down, a retired teacher who spent her days watching the street from behind lace curtains. Mrs. Harding, I'm Sharon's son. Did you see anything yesterday afternoon? The old woman's face softened with sympathy. I heard about what happened. It's terrible. This used to be such a safe neighborhood. She paused, then lowered her voice. I did see a van. Dark blue, maybe black. It was parked on the corner for about 20 minutes before it drove off fast. Around 3:30. Did you see the license plate? No, but it had one of those company names on the side. Something about appliances or repairs. The letters were faded, though. James thanked her and moved on. 2 other neighbors confirmed seeing the van. One thought it was a delivery vehicle. Another remembered it because it had been parked illegally, blocking a driveway. When Jared called back, he had more. Got something from a traffic camera 2 blocks from your mom's place. Dark blue Chevy van. Ran a red light around 3:45 p.m. Couldn't get a plate number, but I got a friend in the DMV. Might be able to narrow it down. Good. What about police chatter? Nothing specific, but here's something interesting. There have been 6 similar home invasions in the area over the past 3 months. All elderly victims, all during daytime hours, all brutally beaten even after giving up their valuables. The MO matches. James felt the cold fury deepen. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was a pattern, a hunting ground. These men were predators who specifically targeted the vulnerable and elderly. Send me everything you have on those other cases. By noon, James had addresses, police reports, victim statements. He spread them across his kitchen table and studied the pattern. The homes formed a rough circle about a 10-mile radius. All single-story houses in working-class neighborhoods. All victims over 65, living alone or with only a spouse. But it was the timeline that caught his attention. The attacks came in clusters, 2 or 3 within a week, then nothing for 2 to 3 weeks. Like they were working in bursts, probably selling the stolen goods before hitting again. His phone buzzed with a text from Jared. Found the van. Registered to Gordon Townsend, 34, multiple priors for theft and assault. Last known address in East Bakersfield. Sending location now. James felt a surge of satisfaction. The first thread had been pulled. Gordon Townsend lived in a sagging apartment complex where the swimming pool had been drained and filled with trash. James watched from across the street in his truck, patient as death. At 6 p.m., a dark blue van pulled into the lot. A man in his 30s got out, beer belly hanging over his belt, cigarette dangling from his lips. James waited until Townsend disappeared into his apartment, then approached the van. Through the rear windows, he could see a jumble of stolen goods, TVs, jewelry boxes, small electronics. Careless, arrogant. These men thought they were untouchable. He pulled back and waited. Intelligence first, then action. At 8 p.m., Townsend emerged again, joined by two other men. One was massive, 6'4" at least, with a shaved head and neck tattoos that crawled up past his collar. The other was wiry, nervous energy, constantly checking his phone. They climbed into the van and drove off. James followed at a distance, using techniques he'd learned tracking insurgents through Kandahar. Stay back. Use other vehicles as cover. Never follow directly. The van wound through East Bakersfield before pulling into a dive bar called Rusty's. James parked down the street and waited again. Patience was the hunter's greatest weapon. At 10 p.m., a fourth man arrived, older, maybe 50, with a gaunt face and the jerky movements of a longtime meth user. At 11 p.m., a fifth, younger, early 20s with slick back hair and an expensive leather jacket that didn't match the neighborhood. 5 men. The right number. James watched them through the bar's grimy windows, laughing and drinking, celebrating their scores. The big one with the neck tattoos. That had to be the one who'd beaten his mother. The one she described. He took photos with his phone, ran facial recognition through an app Jared had provided. Military-grade software, not quite legal for civilian use. But that ship had sailed the moment they'd touched his mother. The hits came back fast. Vernon Boone, 38. Leader. Multiple assault charges, armed robbery, suspected in 2 unsolved homicides. The young one in the leather jacket. Wayne Floyd, 36. The big one with neck tattoos. Assault with a deadly weapon, domestic violence, aggravated battery. Just released from prison 6 months ago. Randy Hart, 29. The wiry, nervous one. Burglary, possession, identity theft. The tech guy, probably. Clarence Potter, 51. The meth head. Long history of drug offenses and petty theft. Follower, not a leader. Gordon Townsend, 34. The driver. Their transportation and fence for stolen goods. James felt something settle in his chest. The calm before the storm. He knew their names now. He knew their faces. And in the next 36 hours, he would know everything else. He called Jared. About IDs on all 5. Need you to run backgrounds, addresses, associates, regular haunts. Everything. You're really doing this. They beat my 73-year-old mother for fun, Jared, while she begged them to stop. Then they laughed about it. I'm not arguing, brother. Just making sure you've thought this through. 15 years in the Rangers. I've thought through scenarios of hell of a lot more complicated than this. All right, give me 6 hours. I'll have everything you need. James sat in his truck until the bar closed at 2 a.m., watching the 5 men stumble out. They were drunk, careless, arguing about something. Vernon Boone shoved Clarence Potter against the van, shouting about money. Wayne Floyd separated them, but not before James saw the dynamic clearly. Vernon was the brains, such as they were. Wayne was the enforcer, the muscle. The others were followers, weak links in the chain. In any operation, you always identified the weak links. They were the ones who broke under pressure, who gave up information, who made mistakes. James followed Gordon Townsend's van back to the apartment complex, then broke off. He had what he needed for tonight. The rest would come tomorrow. At 3 a.m., James sat in his own apartment, spreading everything across his wall like a targeting package. Photos, addresses, known associates, criminal histories, patterns of behavior. He drew connections with red string, building a complete picture of his enemy. It was like preparing for a mission in Fallujah or Kabul, except his targets were right here in his hometown, preying on people like his mother. People who couldn't fight back. But James could. His phone buzzed with an email from Jared. Finish the backgrounds. Sending now. Also, heads up. Vernon Boone has a connection to a local cop, Donald Alvarado. Might want to keep this off the grid. James opened the file and read. Donald Alvarado, 15 years on the force, multiple complaints about excessive force, and evidence tampering that never stuck. There were photos of Alvarado meeting with Vernon Boone outside a strip club downtown. Money changing hands. So that's why the police response had been so perfunctory. They weren't just overworked. At least one of them was actively protecting the crew. James smiled grimly. This would make it easier, actually. No need to worry about the law interfering. He was completely on his own, the way he preferred it. He spent the rest of the night planning. Not the revenge. That part was simple. But the capture. Taking 5 men, even weak, stupid criminals required precision. He had to isolate them, control the environment, eliminate any chance of escape or outside interference. By dawn, he had his plan. It was aggressive, dangerous, and completely illegal. It was also going to work. At 7 a.m., James drove to a storage unit he'd rented when he first moved back to Bakersfield. Inside was everything he hadn't been able to let go of from his military days. Body armor, tactical gear, zip ties, duct tape. A go bag that could keep him operational for 72 hours. And in a locked case at the back, his rifle. He ran his hand over the weapon case, but left it closed. This wasn't a shooting mission. This required a different kind of precision. James loaded his truck with what he needed, then headed to Home Depot. Rope, chains, padlocks. The clerk didn't even blink, just another contractor buying supplies. He paid cash. Next stop was a pharmacy where he bought over-the-counter sleeping aids and antihistamines. Combined properly, they'd knock someone out without killing them. He'd learned that in survival training. At noon, James was ready. He'd slept for 3 hours, eaten a high-protein meal, and run through his plan a dozen times. The first target would be the weakest link, Clarence Potter. He found Potter behind a liquor store in southeast Bakersfield, exactly where Jared's intelligence said he'd be. The man was doing a drug deal, clumsy and obvious, with 2 teenagers who looked barely 16. James waited until the transaction finished and the kids left. Then he approached. Clarence Potter? The man spun around, eyes wild with drug-fueled paranoia. Up close, he looked even worse than his mugshot. Sunken cheeks, rotting teeth, scabs on his arms from constant picking. Who's asking? Someone who knows what you did yesterday on Maple Street. Potter's face went slack with fear for just a moment before he tried to run. James had anticipated that. He'd blocked the alley exit with his truck. Potter made it 5 steps before James caught him, one arm snaking around his throat in a rear naked choke. No hesitation, no mercy. Potter struggled for maybe 8 seconds before he went limp. James zip-tied his hands and feet, gagged him with duct tape, and loaded him into the truck bed. He covered him with a tarp and secured it with bungee cords. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes. Nobody saw. Target 1, secured. James drove to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place he'd scouted the night before. It had been a meatpacking plant once, shut down after health code violations. Now it was just concrete walls, rust, and emptiness. Perfect. He dragged Potter inside and chained him to a support pillar. When the man woke up 20 minutes later, James was sitting on a folding chair in front of him, silent and still. Potter's eyes went wide. He tried to scream through the gag. "I'm going to take that off," James said calmly. "If you scream, I'll put it back and leave you here for 3 days with no water. Not if you understand." Potter nodded frantically. James removed the gag. "Maple Street. Yesterday. Elderly woman. You were there. I don't know what you're." James put the gag back on. Potter's eyes filled with tears. "Let's try again. This time, tell the truth." He removed the gag once more. Potter was hyperventilating now, shaking. Okay. Yeah, we hit that house. But I didn't touch the lady. That was Wayne, man. Wayne likes hurting people. I just carried stuff to the van. Who else was there? Vernon, Wayne, Randy Gordon. 5 of us total. Look, man, it's just business. We find empty-looking houses, old people who won't fight back. She did fight back. She tried to protect her home. And Wayne Floyd beat her unconscious while the rest of you laughed. Potter was crying now. "I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. We were high. We weren't thinking. Where's my mother's property? Vernon's got it. He fences everything through this guy in Fresno. Look, I'll tell you whatever you want. Just let me go." James leaned forward. You're not going anywhere. Not yet. You're going to wait here while I collect the others. Then we're all going to visit my mother. You remember her, right? The woman you terrorized in her own home. Potter's face went pale. Please. Please, man. I'll give you money. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. You're right about that last part. James gagged him again and left him chained in the dark warehouse. He had 4 more targets to acquire, and the clock was ticking. Randy Hart was the next easiest. According to Jared's intel, he lived with his girlfriend in a duplex near the airport. James watched the place for 2 hours before Hart emerged alone, carrying a laptop bag, probably off to sell stolen data or hack someone's accounts. Hart climbed into a beat-up Honda Civic and drove to a Starbucks. James followed him inside, watching as the younger man sat up at a corner table, headphones on, lost in whatever illegal activity he was conducting. The sleeping medication went into Hart's coffee while he was in the bathroom. James had learned from a former medic that crushing the pills fine and mixing them with something hot masked the taste almost completely. Hart drank half his coffee before his eyes started to droop. He tried to stand, confused, then collapsed back into his chair. James was there immediately, playing the concerned stranger. Hey man, you okay? You look sick. Let me help you to your car. The barista barely glanced up. Just another customer having a medical episode. James half-carried Hart outside, loaded him into the truck, and drove off. No drama, no witnesses. Target 2, secured. Hart woke up chained next to Potter in the warehouse. His confusion turned to terror as he realized where he was. What the fuck? Who are you? Do you know who I work for? Vernon Boone, James said. Small-time gang leader who thinks he's smarter than he is. You're his tech guy. You scout the targets, monitor police scanners, probably handle the security systems. Hart's face went white. How do you? Maple Street. Yesterday, you were in the van, monitoring police radio while your friends beat an elderly woman in her kitchen. I didn't touch her. No, you just made sure they didn't get caught. Which makes you complicit in assault, burglary, elder abuse. I could go on. Randy Hart tried a different approach, the smart guy's defense. Look, I don't know what you're planning, but you're making a mistake. You heard us. Vernon will come after you. He knows people. Dangerous people. James smiled without humor. I'm counting on Vernon coming after me. Makes it easier to find him. He gagged Hart and left him next to the still sobbing Clarence Potter. 3 more to go. Gordon Townsend was the tricky one. The driver rarely went anywhere without his van, and the van was recognizable. James needed to draw him out. He called Townsend's phone from a burner, disguising his voice. Gordon? It's Rick from Fresno. Vernon told me to call you. Got a load that needs moving tonight. Can you bring the van to the usual spot? Townsend grumbled, but agreed. The usual spot turned out to be a loading dock behind a closed shopping center. James got there first and waited in the shadows. When Townsend's van pulled up, James approached from behind, moving silent as smoke. The driver was listening to radio, smoking a cigarette, completely unaware. James opened the door and tasered him before he could react. Target 3, secured. Townsend joined the others in the warehouse, still groggy from the electrical shock. When he saw Potter and Hart chained up, he started cursing. You're dead, man. You're fucking dead. Vernon's going to skin you alive. He can try, James said. First he has to find me. And right now, I'm more worried about finding him. That left the 2 hardest targets, Vernon Boone and Wayne Floyd. These weren't followers or tech nerds or drug addicts. These were violent men who wouldn't go quietly. James needed a different approach. He spent the next 4 hours watching Vernon's apartment, a surprisingly nice place in a gated community on the north side. Drug money and stolen goods paid well, apparently. Wayne Floyd lived 2 buildings over, which meant the 2 were close. Probably met up regularly. At 9 p.m., both men emerged and climbed into a black Escalade with tinted windows. They drove to a strip club downtown, the same one where Donald Alvarado had been photographed meeting Vernon. James couldn't take them in a public place, not with witnesses and security. He needed them isolated. So he waited again, patient, watching the front door of the club. At midnight, a woman approached him in the parking lot. You've been sitting here a while, she said. She was in her 40s, tired eyes, the look of someone who'd been dancing for money too long. Her name Tag, said Lori. Waiting for someone, James said. Ain't we all? She lit a cigarette. You're watching Vernon, right? Don't bother trying to collect. He don't pay his debts. James looked at her more carefully. You know him? Everyone here knows Vernon. He and Wayne think they own the place. Tip like shit, grab a girl, start fights. Management won't do nothing cause Vernon's got dirt on the owner. An idea formed. He ever leave alone? Never. Him and Wayne are attached at the hip. But, she hesitated, studying James. You're not a collector, are you? No. I'm something else. Good. Because Vernon Boone is a piece of shit who deserves whatever's coming to him. You want to know when they leave? They've got a routine. Every Wednesday night, they pick up a shipment from this warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Just the two of them, around 2 a.m. James pulled out $200. You didn't see me. She took the money and smiled sadly. Honey, I never see nothing. At 1:45 a.m., James was positioned near the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. It was perfect, isolated, no cameras, no witnesses. A loading dock, empty parking lot, and a street that barely saw traffic at this hour. The black Escalade pulled up at 2:15 a.m. Vernon and Wayne got out, relaxed, talking about something and laughing. They had no idea they were being hunted. James waited until they were at the warehouse door before he made his move. He learned in sniper school that the best shot was the one your target never saw coming. The same principle applied here. He approached from behind, silent, and drove his fist into the pressure point at the base of Wayne Floyd's skull. The big man dropped like a felled tree. Vernon spun around, reaching for a gun at his waist, but James was faster. He swept Vernon's legs and had him on the ground in 2 seconds. One knee on his chest, the gun kicked away. Remember Maple Street? James said quietly. Elderly woman, beat her half to death for fun. Vernon's eyes went wide with recognition and fear. You're the son. Sharon's kid. That's right. And you made a mistake when you touched my mother. Vernon tried to fight, but James had trained with men twice his skill level. He put Vernon in a chokehold until he went limp, then zip-tied both men and loaded them into his truck. Wayne Floyd was so massive that James had to use a furniture dolly he'd brought specifically for this scenario. Target 4 and 5. Secured. The sun was rising when James arrived back at the warehouse with his final cargo. All 5 men were now chained in a row, waking up to find themselves in a concrete nightmare. Vernon Boone was the last to regain consciousness, and when he did, his cocky demeanor evaporated. You can't do this, Vernon said. You know who I know? You're a dead man. James knelt down in front of him. In Afghanistan, I tracked a Taliban commander for 3 weeks. He'd executed 27 villagers for helping American forces. When I finally took the shot, it was from 1,400 meters. He never knew what hit him. You 5? You're not even a challenge. What do you want? Money? We can pay you. I don't want your money. I want justice. That old bitch had it coming. James backhanded Vernon so hard his head snapped to the side. You don't get to talk about my mother. You gave up that right when you beat her unconscious in her kitchen. He stood up and looked at all 5 of them. 48 hours. That's how long it took to find you. You're sloppy, stupid, and cruel. You prey on the weak because you are weak. But now you're going to learn what happens when you pick the wrong target. What are you going to do? Clarence Potter whimpered. James smiled coldly. That's not my decision to make. He pulled out his phone and dialed his mother. Hey, Ma. I found them. All 5. I'm bringing them to you. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Sharon Reed's voice came through, stronger than it had been in days. The house. If that's where you want them. Another pause. My house. They violated my home. That's where they'll pay. Understood. Give me 2 hours. James rented a cargo van and spent the next hour loading all 5 men, still chained and gagged, into the back. They struggled and tried to scream through their gags, but there was no one to hear them. The industrial area was deserted. He drove carefully, obeying every traffic law. The last thing he needed was to get pulled over with 5 kidnapped men in the back. When he arrived at his mother's house, dawn was breaking over the quiet suburban street. Sharon was waiting on the porch, a sight that made James's chest tighten. She'd cleaned herself up, but the bruises were still vivid against her pale skin. Her left eye was still swollen. But she stood straight, dignified, holding a baseball bat. His father's bat. The one Sharon had kept in the garage for 30 years. "These them?" she asked as James opened the van doors. "Every one." James dragged them out one by one, forcing them to their knees in the driveway. Vernon Boone was trying to look defiant, but his eyes kept darting to the bat in Sharon's hands. Wayne Floyd just glared, still the tough guy even now. The other three looked terrified. Sharon walked slowly down the porch steps, studying each face. When she reached Wayne Floyd, she stopped. "You're the one," she said. "The one with the neck tattoos. You hit me first. Call me an old bitch. Laughed when I cried." Wayne tried to spit at her, but James caught him by the throat and squeezed until his face turned purple. "Show some respect," James said quietly, "or this ends a lot worse for you." Sharon turned to Vernon. "And you're the leader. The one who said I was too poor to bother with. That you should burn my house down." Vernon said nothing, but James could see him calculating, looking for an angle. "You took my things," Sharon continued, her voice steady. "My jewelry, my television, my dead husband's medals. But that wasn't enough for you. You had to hurt me. An old woman who never did anything to you. You had to make me feel helpless in my own home." She gripped the bat tighter. "But I'm not helpless anymore." James had unchained their legs, but kept their hands bound behind their backs. He forced all 5 men into the house, into the living room where just 2 days ago they'd beaten his mother. The bloodstain was still on the carpet. "This is how it's going to work," James said. "My mother's going to have her say. You're going to listen. If you try to run, I'll break your legs. If you try to fight, I'll put you down permanently. Do we understand each other?" Clarence Potter was crying. "Please, we're sorry. We'll make it right." "You're sorry you got caught," Sharon said. She hefted the bat, testing its weight. "You're sorry you picked someone with a son who knows how to track people." She looked at James. "Close the curtains." He did. What happened next took 3 hours. Sharon started with the followers, Clarence, Gordon, and Randy. She made them kneel. Then, with a strength James didn't know she still possessed, she swung the bat. Not at their heads. That would be too quick, too merciful. She aimed for their shoulders, their backs, their legs. The same places they'd hit her. Each swing was accompanied by words. "This is for making me beg." Swing. "This is for laughing while I cried." Swing. "This is for making me afraid in my own home." Swing. The men screamed, begged, promised anything. But Sharon didn't stop. James watched from the corner, ready to intervene if she went too far, but she was in control. Every hit was calculated, measured. She knew exactly what she was doing. After an hour, the 3 followers were huddled on the floor, bruised and broken, but alive. Sharon moved to Wayne Floyd next. The big man tried to tough it out at first, sneering at her. "That all you got, old woman?" Sharon drove the bat into his knee with a crack that made everyone in the room flinch. Wayne's scream was animal-like, raw, and desperate. "My husband used to play baseball," Sharon said conversationally, catching her breath. "Minor leagues before he joined the army. He taught me how to swing. Always said the key was in the hips, not the arms." She demonstrated on Wayne's other knee. For 30 minutes, Sharon worked on Wayne Floyd. By the end, he was sobbing, begging, all his toughness gone. The man who'd beaten an elderly woman for sport was now crying for mercy from that same woman. Finally, she turned to Vernon Boone. "You're the one I want most," she said. "You're the leader. The others are just stupid, weak followers. But you? You're the one who decided to target me. Who chose my house? Who gave the order?" Vernon had been watching everything with growing horror. His cocky demeanor was completely gone now. Please, I'll give you everything back. I'll pay you. I'll leave town. You'll never see me again." "You're right about that," Sharon said. She didn't hold back with Vernon. Every hit was harder, more vicious. She hit him the ribs, the spine, the arms and legs. She made him pay for every bruise on her face, every moment of fear she'd felt, every tear she'd cried. James watched his mother, this woman who'd raised him with kindness and love, and felt a surge of pride. She wasn't being cruel for the sake of cruelty. She was reclaiming her power, her dignity, her sense of safety. When Sharon finally stopped, breathing hard and sweating despite the cool morning air, all 5 men were broken heaps on her living room floor. Conscious but utterly destroyed. She handed James the bat. Thank you for bringing them to me. You earned this, Ma. Sharon looked down at Vernon Boone, who was trying to curl into a ball, whimpering. I want my property back. Every single item. It's at my storage unit, Vernon gasped. Keys in my pocket. Take it all. Just let us go. James retrieved the key and the address. I'll verify that first. If everything's there, we'll talk about what happens next. He left the 5 men under Sharon's watchful eye while he drove to Vernon's storage unit. Inside, he found exactly what he expected, dozens of items from multiple robberies, including all of his mother's property, his father's medals, her jewelry, everything. But he also found something else, detailed records. Vernon Boone might have been a criminal, but he was a meticulous one. He documented every job, every fence, every piece of stolen property. And most interesting, he'd kept insurance, photos of Detective Donald Alvarado accepting money, recorded conversations, evidence of corruption that went back 5 years. Vernon had been building leverage against the corrupt cop, probably in case he ever got arrested. It was smart, in a twisted way. But now that leverage belonged to James. He loaded everything into the truck and drove back to his mother's house. The 5 men were still there, barely conscious, groaning in pain. Sharon sat in a chair, the bat across her lap, looking exhausted but satisfied. All there, she asked. Everything, plus something extra. James showed her the files on Vernon's phone. Sharon's eyes widened. Is that evidence of police corruption? Vernon's been paying off Detective Alvarado for years. A slow smile spread across Sharon's face. Then we have leverage. James had already been thinking 3 steps ahead. We do, but we need to be smart about this. He made a call to Jared Haynes. Need you to come over, bringing the documentation we discussed. Jared arrived 20 minutes later, took one look at the 5 brutalized men in the living room, and whistled low. Jesus, James, you weren't kidding around. They had it coming. But now we need to finish this properly. They spent the next hour documenting everything. Photos of the stolen property, recordings of the men confessing to their crimes, copies of Vernon's files on Donald Alvarado. James was building an airtight case, the kind that couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. Then he made a call to Lonnie Hutchins, the young patrol officer who'd taken his mother's report. Officer Hutchins? This is James Red, Sharon Reed's son. Remember the home invasion you took a report on 2 days ago? Of course. Has there been a development? You could say that. I've recovered all the stolen property and identified the perpetrators. I have confessions, evidence, and something else you're going to want to see. Can you come to my mother's house? Bring someone from Internal Affairs if you can. There was a pause. Mr. Red, how exactly did you recover this evidence? I'll explain when you get here. Trust me, you want to see this. Hutchins arrived with his supervisor and an Internal Affairs investigator named Arthur Davies. They walked into Sharon's house expecting a standard evidence handover. What they found was 5 brutalized men chained in the living room, groaning in pain. What the hell is this? Davies demanded. James handed him a folder. Evidence of 6 months of violent home invasions targeting elderly victims. Complete confessions from all 5 perpetrators. Documentation of fencing operations. And evidence that Detective Donald Alvarado has been taking bribes to protect this crew. Davies opened the folder, his eyes widening with each page. Where did you get this? I found the men who attacked my mother. I interrogated them. They gave up everything. You kidnapped them? I made a citizen's arrest, James said calmly. These men are violent criminals who've been preying on the elderly for months. The police response to my mother's case was inadequate, so I handled it myself. Hutchins looked at the 5 men, then at Sharon, then at James. Did you torture them? No, Sharon spoke up. I did. They beat me in my home for fun. I simply returned the favor. Davies was struggling to process what he was seeing. This is highly irregular. You can't just what? James interrupted. Can't protect my mother when the police won't? Can't track down violent criminals who've been operating freely? Can't expose corruption in your own department? The corruption allegations are documented with photos, recordings, and financial records going back 5 years. Detective Alvarado has been taking money from Vernon Boone to tip them off about investigations and steer attention away from their operations. It's all there. Arthur Davies sat down heavily, reading through the files. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. After several minutes, he looked up at James. You've put me in an impossible position. What you've done here is illegal on multiple levels. Kidnapping, assault, unlawful imprisonment. And yet you're holding evidence of crimes far worse, James said. 6 months of brutal attacks on elderly victims. Police corruption. A gang that's been operating with impunity because they had a cop in their pocket. So you have a choice, Detective Davies. You can arrest me for doing your job, or you can take these men into custody and clean up your department. The room was silent except for the groaning of the 5 broken men. Finally, Davies stood up. Officer Hutchins, call for ambulances and transport. We're taking these 5 into custody. He looked at James. As for you, Mr. Reed, I'm going to pretend I arrived here and found these men had injured themselves while attempting to flee after you identified them as your mother's attackers. Is that clear? James nodded slowly. Crystal clear. But understand this, you got lucky. If this goes sideways, if any of these men die or make allegations that stick, I can't protect you. I understand. The ambulances arrived, and the 5 men were loaded onto stretchers, still handcuffed. Vernon Boone tried one last desperate play as they wheeled him out. He tortured us. He kidnapped us, and his crazy mother beat us with a bat. You can't just let him. Shut up, Arthur Davies said coldly. You're under arrest for armed robbery, assault, elder abuse, and about 20 other charges. You're looking at 25 to life. And when the DA sees this evidence, you'll be lucky to ever see daylight again. Vernon's mouth snapped shut. Wayne Floyd just glared at James as they took him away, but there was no more bravado in his eyes. Just hatred and pain. After they were gone, Arthur Davies turned to James and Sharon. The DA will need your statements. Both of you. And Mrs. Red, you're going to need a lawyer. For what? Sharon asked. You admitted to assaulting 5 men with a baseball bat. Even if they deserved it, that's still assault. Actually, Jared Haynes spoke up. It's self-defense. These men broke into her home, beat her severely, and threatened her life. She had every reason to fear for her safety. When Mr. Reed brought them here to recover the stolen property, they became violent, and Mrs. Red defended herself with the only weapon available. Davies studied Jared. You a lawyer? No, but I've worked enough security cases to know the law. Mrs. Reed was defending herself and her property. That's her right. Davies looked skeptical but nodded. We'll let the DA sort it out. But I'm telling you now, this is going to be messy. He was wrong. It wasn't messy at all. The evidence James had gathered was so overwhelming that the DA had no choice but to prosecute aggressively. Vernon Boone tried to cut a deal, but the recorded confessions and physical evidence made his case impossible to defend. He was convicted on 14 counts of armed robbery, 7 counts of assault, and conspiracy charges. 28 years, no parole. Wayne Floyd got 32 years for aggravated assault and battery. His prior convictions meant he'd die in prison. Randy Hart, Gordon Townsend, and Clarence Potter all took plea deals in exchange for testifying against Vernon and Wayne. They each got 8 to 12 years. Detective Donald Alvarado was arrested based on Vernon's documentation. He tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was ironclad. He was convicted of corruption, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. 15 years, and he'd serve every day of it in a separate facility from the men he'd protected for his own safety. As for James and Sharon, the DA declined to press charges. Arthur Davies's report stated that the suspects had been injured while resisting citizens' arrest, and that Sharon had acted in self-defense when they became violent during property recovery. It was a thin story, but backed by enough plausible details that it held up. The local news ran the story as a feel-good piece. Elderly woman and Army Ranger son take down home invasion gang. Sharon became something of a local hero, interviewed by 3 different stations. She told them about her ordeal, her fear, and how her son had brought her justice when the system failed. She left out the part about the baseball bat and the 3 hours in the living room. Some things were private. 3 weeks later, James stood in his mother's newly repaired house. She'd had the back door replaced with a steel security door, installed cameras, and joined a neighborhood watch program. The bloodstain was gone from the carpet, professionally cleaned. "You doing okay, Ma?" James asked. Sharon smiled, looking more like herself than she had in weeks. The bruises had faded, and the spark was back in her eyes. "I'm better than okay. I feel safe again. Not because of the cameras or the new door, but because I know I'm not helpless. Those men tried to make me a victim, but in the end, I made them pay. You did. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you too, Jamie. You could have killed them. You had every right. But you didn't. You brought them to me and let me have my justice. That took more strength than violence." James had thought about that a lot over the past few weeks. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, killing had been part of the job. Enemy combatants, clear threats, sanctioned targets. But this was different. This was personal. And while part of him had wanted to put a bullet in each of them, he knew that wasn't real justice. Real justice was making them face their crimes, making them spend decades behind bars, knowing they'd been beaten by the elderly woman they'd tried to terrorize. That was a victory more complete than any kill shot. "The DA called," Sharon said. "They've recovered property from 17 other home invasions. 17 families are getting their things back because you tracked those men down." James nodded. "Good. And there's something else." Sharon handed him an envelope. This came yesterday. Inside was a letter from the governor's office, thanking James for his service both in the military and in protecting his community. There was also a check, a reward for information leading to the arrest of a violent criminal gang. "I don't want it," James said. "Neither do I, so I already donated it to a victims advocacy group that helps elderly people recover from violent crimes. They're going to use it to set up a hotline and support network." James smiled. "That's perfect, Ma." They sat together on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids play in the street as the sun set. It was peaceful, normal, safe. Everything Sharon deserved. "You know they'll send people after you," Sharon said quietly. "Vernon's gang had connections. Someone might come looking for revenge. Let them," James said. "I'm not hard to find, and I'm not afraid." He meant it. After 15 years as a Ranger sniper, after 97 confirmed kills in the world's most dangerous places, the threat of petty criminals didn't concern him. If they came, he'd handle them the same way he'd handled Vernon Boone and his crew. But he doubted they would come. Word had spread through Bakersfield's criminal underworld about what happened to the home invasion gang. 5 men taken down in 48 hours by one highly trained soldier protecting his mother. That wasn't a target. That was a death sentence. James's phone buzzed. "Jared. Hey, brother. Got something you might be interested in." "What's that?" "There's a family in Fresno. Elderly couple. Got hit by a similar crew last week. Police aren't doing much. The son called me. Heard about what happened with your mom. He wants to know if you'd be willing to help him track them down." James was quiet for a moment, thinking. He'd spent 15 years serving his country, following orders, doing his duty. Now he was a civilian, building houses, living a simple life. But some skills didn't fade. Some instincts stayed sharp. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a mission worth doing. "Give me the details," James said. Sharon looked at him and shook her head with a knowing smile. "Once a ranger, always a ranger." Something like that. As the sun set over Bakersfield, James Red sat with his mother, at peace for the first time in weeks. Vernon Boone and his crew were in prison where they belonged. Donald Alvarado was facing justice. And somewhere in Fresno, another family was about to get the help the system couldn't provide. James had learned something important through all of this. The world was full of predators who targeted the weak, the vulnerable, the elderly. People who thought they were untouchable because the system was slow, overwhelmed, or corrupt. But sometimes the system didn't matter. Sometimes justice came from somewhere else. From a son who loved his mother. From 15 years of training in the world's most elite military unit. From a man who knew how to track, how to hunt, and how to make predators understand what it felt like to be prey. Vernon Boone and his gang had made a simple mistake. They'd thought Sharon Reed was just another helpless old woman. They hadn't realized she had a son who would move heaven and earth to protect her. They'd picked the wrong house, the wrong family, the wrong fight, and they'd paid for it with 28 years in prison, 32 years, 8 years, 12 years, and 15 years for the cop who'd protected them. That was justice. Not perfect, not by the book, but real and earned. James put his arm around his mother's shoulders as they sat together on the porch. Whatever came next, whoever needed help, he was ready. Because some men were sheep, some were wolves, and some, like James Red, were sheepdogs. The wolves of the world were about to learn that lesson the hard way. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.